What's up? It's Johanna with God is Glamorous, where we learn how to live our best lives through Jesus Christ. And today, we are talking all about daddy issues. So you may be asking, why are we talking about daddy issues? Aren't you typically a motivational, entrepreneurial type speaker? Well, yes. But how are we supposed to be able to live our best lives through Jesus Christ if we're still holding on to the bitterness and the anger and the hatred that we may have experienced from our fathers? So I typically did not want to do this video. I like to stay on the surface level with entrepreneurship because I like to kind of play it safe and be able to speak to a variety of people. I like to put my videos on LinkedIn and Pinterest and all these other platforms, but I just felt God saying, you will never be able to truly inspire and impact and serve my people if you don't get outside of your comfort zone. So I was like, all right, fine, I'll do the video, but I need to get a sign. Give me a sign, confirm that you want me to talk about this subject. And literally a few minutes later, I hopped on YouTube and guess what ad popped up? A GoDaddy commercial. So I was like, all right, fine, I'll do the video. So I prayed about this video. I asked God to show me different topics in the Bible that can allow me to highlight the issues of daddy issues. And I was surprised to see that there are so many issues that people have had with their fathers. So we're going to touch on 3 different topics for the sake of time. But just taking a look at Abraham and Isaac, Abraham was going to sacrifice his own son. But because God stepped in and gave Abraham a sacrificial lamb, that didn't happen. But imagine having your father try to kill you. That's really, really crazy. So Jonathan may have had issues with his father, King Saul, because King Saul was after King David. He wanted to kill King David. And Jonathan was David's best friend. So imagine having those kind of daddy issues with your father. King Solomon may have even had daddy issues with his father, King David. Why? Well, because his father killed his mother's first husband. So if you feel as though you may have had issues with your father, imagine taking a look at the stories in the Bible. So why is this so important? Well, the U.S. has the highest rate of single-parent households. And not only that, 1/4 of children in the U.S. are raised in a single-family household. And out of those children, 83% are single mothers. So there are a lot of people within the U.S. and all around the world who may be facing the pain of not having their dads in their lives. So without further ado, let's learn all about daddy issues. What are they? And more importantly, how we are able to overcome that so that we can ultimately move forward and get on with having the greatest life that God ultimately has for us. All right, so the first point that we're going to talk about are single mothers. So if you are someone like me, you were raised in a single-parent household. My mother was a single mother, and she raised 4 girls all on her own. And there are examples within the Bible where there have been single mothers and how God was able to provide regardless of what kind of parent household that you may have grown up in. So if you've never heard the story of this love triangle with Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar, definitely want to check it out. But I'm going to give you a short backstory, but ultimately, Abraham ultimately allowed Hagar to become a single mother due to a very selfish decision that he made. So long story short, God promises Abraham that he will be a father of many, but the only problem is he has a wife named Sarah, and they are both old, and Sarah is way past the years to have any children. So what does she do? She encourages Abraham to sleep with their servant Hagar so that they can have this baby in hopes that this baby will fulfill the promise that God ultimately gave to their actual son later on down the road. So Abraham and Hagar, their servant, have this baby, and his name is Ishmael. So for a while, they believe Ishmael would be the one to fulfill this promise, but ultimately, God actually fulfills that promise through Abraham and Sarah miraculously, and in Sarah's old age, they end up having a son, Isaac, which I mentioned before, Abraham tried to sacrifice Isaac, and it's just a hot mess, a long story, but long story short, Sarah eventually tells Abraham that she wants Ishmael and Hagar to leave because she wants nothing to do with them anymore, because now they have this promised son and they don't feel as though, or she doesn't feel as though they need to stick around anymore. So Abraham agrees and he sends Hagar and Ishmael into the wilderness, ultimately forcing her to become a single mother. So during this time, when they were in the wilderness, Abraham packed some food and some water and sent them on their way. But as you can imagine, as they're walking through the wilderness and into the desert, food and water is going to become very scarce, and it did, and they end up running out of water. So during this time, Hagar was really, really worried. She was scared. She was crying out to God. She even thought that for a moment that they were going to die within the wilderness. But God was able to provide and ultimately still ensure that although Ishmael was not going to be that promised son through Abraham, he was still going to make her son a great nation. So it says, and God heard the voice of the lad. Then the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, what ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation. So this is just like you. You may have grown up with a single mother, or you may be a single mother, and you may feel like you are forgotten about or that no one cares about you, but understand that although you may be in a situation, or you may have grown up in a situation where you have been a single mom, or where you may have been raised by a single mother or a single parent, God still plans to make you a great nation as well. And not only that, God is the ultimate provider. So being raised by a single mother, there have been times when money was scarce and there weren't a lot of resources that we had, but ultimately God did provide. And my mom is now an amazing business owner. She has 2 successful companies and she is absolutely thriving. So even if you are a single mother, or if you have grown up in a single parent household, I'm sure that you can relate that God is still the ultimate provider, and he provides just like he provided for Hagar and Ishmael. So it says, then God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad a drink. God was with the lad, and he grew up and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer. He dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. So not only did God provide Hagar and Ishmael with more water and more food and more resources, he provided a well. So it's not only a good thing to give someone water, but when you give them a well, you give them a renewable resource. So not only trust God to provide for you for a moment, but trust God to provide for you for a lifetime. And this is exactly what God was able to do for Hagar and Ishmael. So maybe you grew up with a single mother and you didn't have a father around, and you have these issues of pain, of abandonment and neglect, and not having that father figure to be in your life. It's really important to understand that regardless of how you were raised, God is still going to be that provider for you. Talk to God, ask God to give you the resources that you need, and God will not only provide water for you, God will provide a well for you as well. So as you go through life, understand that your father may not have been there, but have that heart of forgiveness, because you know that your heavenly Father is the ultimate provider and will always give you that love and protection that you've always needed. All right, so now that we've talked about being in a single parent household, let's talk about maybe you had a father around, but your father didn't always make the best decisions. In fact, he may have made some really selfish decisions that put you in a really, really bad situation. And this is exactly what happened with Rachel and Leah. So long story short, we're going to summarize this whole thing up. Rachel and Leah had a father named Laban. And there was a man, Jacob, who came to their town, and he saw Rachel, and he absolutely fell in love with her. She was so beautiful. But she had a sister, and her sister was not that beautiful. In fact, the Bible said that she had no sparkle in her eye. She may have been blind, or she may have had a lazy eye, but essentially they made it so Leah was not seen as that attractive, but Rachel was absolutely gorgeous. So of course, Jacob falls in love with Rachel, and he agrees to work for Laban for 7 years, so that after those 7 years, he will be able to marry Rachel. So fast forward 7 years, Jacob fulfills his promise, and he's ready to marry Rachel. So Laban makes a really, really selfish decision, and instead gives Leah as a wife to Jacob instead, and Jacob doesn't realize it until the very next day, and when he already sleeps with her and all of that, and then he goes to Laban. He's like, hey, like, you gave me Leah. I wanted Rachel. So eventually Laban ends up giving Rachel to Jacob, but then this creates all kinds of sibling rivalry where Leah doesn't feel like she's good enough, and Rachel isn't able to have children for Jacob, so she ends up allowing Jacob to sleep with her servant, and Leah ends up having Jacob sleep with her servant, and it's just the sibling rivalry of Leah not feeling wanted and valued, and it just becomes a hot mess simply because their father made a really, really selfish decision. So it says, then Jacob also went into Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served with Laban still another 7 years. So as you can see, it literally says that although Jacob still had Rachel and Leah as wives, he loved Rachel even more. And as a result, Leah constantly felt like she had to prove her worth to Jacob by constantly giving him more and more children. So it says, she conceived again and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will become attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi. So as you can see, this was a hot mess. And because of Laban, Rachel and Leah's father, who made a really, really selfish decision on their behalf, it created all kinds of sibling rivalry. It allowed Leah to feel like she wasn't good enough, that she was unloved. It put Rachel in a bad situation because now she wants to prove that she's worthy, because now Rachel wasn't able to have children, but her sister was. And it just created a really, really bad situation. So it's really important to understand that although you may have had an issue with your father, he may not have been there, he may have made a really bad and selfish decision that put you and your family in a bad situation, understand that it is unrealistic to hold your earthly father to the standards that only your heavenly Father can fill for you. So it's really important that if you truly need to fill that void of not having a father in your life, or having a father that may have made some really, really bad decisions for you, just understand that your heavenly Father is truly the one that you can go to fulfill any voice that you have lacked from your earthly father. So make sure to pray and talk to God and ask God to give you that comfort that you need, because God is ultimately the one that is able to fulfill those promises and those needs that you needed from your earthly father. And last but not least, we're also going to be talking about Lot. So this one is going to be a really, really deep issue. I am grateful that I can't relate to this, but this is an issue that happens with a lot of women growing up with a father, and this is going to be talking about sexual abuse. And this is a situation that Lot was about to put his daughters in a really bad situation to become sexually abused. So this is a story about Sodom and Gomorrah, and all these stories take place in Genesis, ironically. I don't know what's up with Genesis, but essentially God was going to destroy the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. So there was one family that he wanted to save because everyone else was really, really wicked, and he couldn't save all of them, but Lot and his family still were able to be saved. And there were 2 angels that came to Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot wanted to host these 2 men, and they were men that were angels, essentially. And Lot asked them to come to his house so that he can host them for the night, and they were going to leave in the morning and take Lot and his family with them. So essentially, this city was so evil and so full of lust that when they saw these 2 men, a bunch of men, they were like, oh my gosh, who are these men? Like, we want to go to Lot's house, and essentially they wanted to have sex with these men. I know, crazy. So they go to Lot's house, and they're like, bring out these 2 men. We want to, let me give you the exact words that they said. So in Genesis chapter 19, verse 5, it says, and they called to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them carnally. So that we may know them carnally. You already know what that means. They essentially wanted to have sex with these men. So Lot made a really bad decision, And he instead offered his two daughters, his two virgin daughters, to these men. So check this out. In Genesis chapter 19, verse 6 through 8, it says, "So Lot went out to them through the doorway, shut the door behind them, and said, 'Please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. See, now I have two daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof.'" Seriously, the Bible is so crazy. I know you all watch all these crazy soap operas and all these movie series, but if you really need some drama, check out the Bible, for real. So essentially, Lot's like, hey, I'm not going to bring out these men, but hey, my daughters are virgins. You can have them. And imagine the daddy issues that Lot's daughters may have faced, knowing yo, my dad was literally going to give me to a bunch of men to be raped, right? Crazy. So you may have been in a situation where your dad made some really, really bad decisions that put you in a sexually harmful situation. I don't know. But as we mentioned before, one of the ways in which you were able to overcome these issues with your father is through a lot of prayer and a lot of forgiveness. Because just if you don't address the root of the problem with having an issue with your dad based on whether or not he was there, or whether or not he abused you sexually, or whether he was just made some really, really bad decisions on your behalf, you have to truly go to God and ask God to help you to forgive your dad, because if you don't, you're going to carry this weight of hatred and bitterness and regret with you everywhere you go. And how do you expect to live your best life if you are still holding on to this weight and this pain of not having your dad in your life? So as we move on and as we realize that we need to get over these daddy issues, I have a few lessons to give to you all. Number one, understand, as I mentioned before, you cannot hold your father or your parents to the same standards that only your heavenly Father can fulfill. Your heavenly Father is the ultimate comforter. He's the ultimate provider. He's the only one that is truly able to give you everything that you absolutely need. Number two, you have to understand that forgiveness is 100% necessary. If you don't forgive, it's essentially like you drinking poison and expecting the other one to die. It's never going to happen. So for you to truly be able to be set free from your daddy issues, you have to be able to forgive. And lastly, one of the ways in which you're able to overcome your daddy issues is to understand that God is truly your Father. So again, humans, they may fail us every single time, whether they're our mom or our dad. They still may have issues that they have not resolved from their childhood. Maybe they didn't have a father or mother that they were able to come to. So they didn't necessarily learn or want to be a good dad or a good mom. It's really, really important to understand that God is your ultimate Father. And whatever issues that you're facing with your earthly father, just know that you can always bring your problems to God, cast your burdens and all your anxiety on God, because God cares for you. So as you go about your day and about your life, I challenge you to just forgive your dad for not being there, or forgive your dad for making bad decisions on your behalf. So I encourage you to practice a heart of forgiveness and understand that if you truly want to be able to move forward, then you really, really have to understand how to forgive your dad and move forward, and know that God is ultimately going to be the one that is truly able to take care of you and provide for you. All right, well, that's a wrap for this week's video of God is Glamorous. I hope this video was able to motivate and inspire you. Please reach out to me if you feel like you need some prayer, or you need some motivation or some guidance on learning how to move forward. But I encourage you to just keep praying and ask God to give you a forgiving heart, so that you are able to overcome any issues that you may have been facing. All right, well, I love you, and I will talk with you next time. Stay glamorous.